Welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about some fall eyeshadow palettes that you might have forgotten about, or maybe you're looking for more grungy kind of color stories. Either way, I have so many palettes that I pulled out from my collection. Turns out that I really like my grungy shadows. Now, of course, you can wear these tones any time of the year, but I think a lot of people do gravitate towards these tones, especially come fall because the leaves are turning and it's just a totally different kind of vibe. And also this is kind of a reminder for me to pull out some of these older palettes. So there's quite a bit of palettes. I have a stack. I don't think I can even actually hold it. Hold on. Let me I just don't want to drop anything. This is the stack I have of fall palettes, and this was like me narrowing it down a little bit, so I'm gonna kind of try to speed through this a little bit because there's so many and I've already filmed 2 videos before this. So let's just jump right into it. These are in no particular order. This is not a ranking. I'm just gonna be talking about a bunch of beautiful palettes. So this one I'm actually wearing on the eyes minus the shimmer shadow. This is the Dark Mattes palette from Viseart. I mean, look at these tones. Oh, these are just so beautiful, and these blend like a dream. They are quite pigmented. Plums and the green and the orange and the red and the blue, like you have everything, the brown, like you could create some more monochromatic looks. And I also love that these have a lot of deepening up options. So this is a great palette to pair with some special shimmers. If you have lots of single eyeshadows from indie brands, especially multi-chromes, definitely a great palette to pair with those. And then I pulled out the Moonfall palette from Shroud Cosmetics. Now their shimmers have improved since this palette, even though Devotion is really beautiful and sparkly, and so is Soulstone. Artifact and Night Song are a little bit more of their kind of regular shimmer formula that they've had previously, so they're not like my favorite shimmer shadows, but the tones in here definitely scream fall. Again, you've got your green, your burgundy, plum, blue, teal, definitely a grungier palette, and you will get lots of smoky kind of eyeshadow looks out of this one, but again, great to pair with some other palettes. This next one is relatively new and is the Fighter palette from Fantasy Cosmetica, and I just feel like this has some really beautiful, more neutral leaning tones, but also you've got the fall vibes of the leaves turning, so you have the orange, the red, and then this mustard green, and the shimmers are absolutely beautiful and spectacular in here. And then of course you got the deepening up shade here, so I think this is such a great kind of everyday go-to. You can create some really stunning looks with this palette, and it's affordable and it's small and concise, which is something I very much enjoy about Fantasy Cosmetica, as they always have some really beautiful 9-pan color stories. So moving on to Glam Cosmetics, I actually had 2 other eyeshadows pulled out, but I decided to only stick to this one. I have these super grungy olivey tones, and then this kind of a dusty teal and deepening up options, especially with these shimmers layered over these beautiful grungy looks with this palette. I definitely need to leave this one out, and I'm planning on using that one very soon. This is by far one of my most favorite color stories from Glam Cosmetics. Did I mention that was a Nocturnal palette? That's a Nocturnal palette, just in case I didn't mention it. And then next I have these 3 Melt Cosmetics eyeshadow palettes. So Melt Cosmetics is kind of known for creating a lot of grungy kind of palettes, so I'm going to talk about these kind of all together. Of course, we have the 420. I'm not 100% sure if this one's available anymore. It has that like cool fun packaging that makes that really funky sound, but this palette is literally fall in a palette. Like, there's so many grungy tones in here, so many mustardy tones, and some just really unique shades in general. Like, I don't think I have some of these in terms of like other palettes, and I have a lot of palettes and also single shadows. So if you have this palette, this is your sign to pull it out for fall. The only shadow in here I wasn't the biggest fan of is the only shimmer in here, which is this gold, and it's still such a weird, underwhelming shimmer formula. I'm not really sure what was going on around this time with Melt Cosmetics. They have definitely stepped up a little bit with their shimmers, but this one was such a dud. But otherwise, I really enjoyed this palette for the mattes. And then the next palette is the Rust palette, which actually used to be a Rust stack back when they had stacks when they first came out as a brand, when they first launched rather. And this one definitely more on the warmer side. So you have some warmer tones between the yellow, the orange, and the brown. The shimmers in here are also a little bit underwhelming, but again, the mattes in here are beautiful. And the third palette I have pulled out from Melt Cosmetics is the Gemini palette. Now this is the new version with a really beautiful packaging, and I do have the old version as well. Shimmers in here, again, a little bit better, but it's really all about the grungy greens and all about the grungy oranges. 90% of Melt Cosmetics eyeshadow palettes, you have plenty of deepening up shades, which is something I've always very much enjoyed. They do have a very, very pigmented formula, like very, very pigmented. So you dip your brush in and you have like fully opaque shadows. So then I pulled out the most recent, I think the most recent, Odin's Eye eyeshadow palettes, the Stone and Rock palette, and the Jewels and Gem palette. I think both of these weren't as fall palettes, at least personally for me, even though this one maybe is actually a little bit more wintry, but to me, I feel like this is like a good transition between going into fall and then from fall to winter. And I talked about this on my dedicated video on these two palettes. I love this color story. This is going to be one of my most favorite color stories that I have in my entire collection. That would be a fun video to do, actually. I should totally do that. I just love the tones in here. I find them very interesting, and especially because they're paired together. So a Rapture, Intoxication, Heaven, Transition, and Seventh Heaven, like all of these together in this palette. And the shimmers are really beautiful in this palette, especially Rhapsody. It's like this really, really beautiful, smooth duochrome kind of shadow. I used it in a look. I would love to see more shadows like this versus their like squishy formula from their single shadows. And then the other palette, of course, is the Stone and Rock palette, which this one, I mean, you have your grungy greens and green shimmer. So especially if you're a green lover and you recently got this palette, you gotta bring it out and do some beautiful green looks for fall with this one. And then I also pulled out Lethal Cosmetics palettes. So I actually don't remember, I think one of them is called Evergreen, and I cannot remember the name of this one. I will put it up on the screen. Editing Millie is going to hate me because I hate putting text up on the screen, but she will do it. So this palette is also for green lovers for sure, but there is that pop of purple and this beautiful duochrome. It's like a blue to purple duochrome, so these two especially layered together would be really nice. And this is just such a great formula because it is Lethal Cosmetics, so they have some beautiful shimmers and matte shadows. I absolutely love their matte shadows. And also you do have some darker shimmer options in this palette. And then this palette, if you're a warm neutral lover, maybe you don't love green for fall, maybe you would like something a little bit more like this, then this one is definitely go-to. You have a mixture of some lighter shimmers, but also some darker shimmers, and then this pop of like a grungy green. Very interesting. I definitely need to bring some of these palettes out. I might as well just leave all of these out. And then next up, I have 3 palettes from Unearthly Cosmetics. So there's the In the Dark palette. They honestly create some really beautiful color stories all year round, but especially fall kind of toned color stories. And this one is no exception. Now, I have the older version of this one. The new version doesn't have removable pans, and I believe that they are also smaller square pans. So this is the older version. Also, the 2 shimmers here are a little bit different in the new version because in this original, these 2 shades actually look almost the same. But that being said, the mattes in here are absolutely beautiful. I love the tones. I always love the way that they pair some really unique tones together. So if you have this palette, whether the new version or the old version, definitely bring this one out. And then the next palette is unfortunately no longer available. So if you have this one, definitely bring it out because that is the Hauntingly Glamorous palette. And let me tell you, I love the mattes in here. I think this was my first time trying back when they were Alien Cosmetics, an eyeshadow palette from them, and I fell in love because these mattes are so spectacular. I love that there's some lighter tones. There's lots of deepening up tones. The 2 shimmers up here are kind of okay. They're just kind of like a standard shimmer iridescent formula. They're not really like shifty or anything like that, but the mattes in here, absolutely beautiful. I have not stopped raving about this palette ever since I got it. It made me jump down the unearthly rabbit hole. And then the next palette is the Not Normal palette. Now this palette, I think they have released like 3 times now also. So I have the version where the pans are removable because I bought the original palette and I used that one when it didn't have removable pans, and then they launched this one and I wanted the removable pans, so I do have to dip into this one. That's why the shadows look untouched, because it is newer and the newer version has smaller pans that are square. So I do want to dip into this one very, very soon. And the tones in here, just so beautiful. The greens, the mustard, the plum, the more kind of burgundy brown, the super cool toned brown down here. Just such a really well curated color story. Next palette is from Blend Bunny, and it is the All Done Up palette. And I mean, the tones in here scream fall to me, and it's all Blend Bunny palettes. I love that I have some pastel tones to blend out some of these mid-tones and the deeper tones to deepen up with. And the shimmers in this one are absolutely spectacular. Shimmers, especially Shine would be such a fun one to layer over the grungy greens, but I mean, you've got lots of grunge, but I also think this would be considered a more neutral palette. So you got both all best worlds in this palette. And then we have a newer palette. This is the Yucca palette, and this one launched this year, and this one is so beautiful. And I think, and the shimmers in here are so amped up, so beautiful. I have a dedicated video on this one, and I had lots and lots of fun with the shimmer shadows, some more neutral shadows, so you can really get like a plethora of different looks from this palette. And then the last palette I'm going to be talking about is the Nomad Haunted Europe palette. Now they just announced and revealed their newest fall eyeshadow palette, and you best believe I'm getting that one because the color story is beautiful. I love the theming and everything. So we've got, again, this little fun thing on the front here, and I love this palette so much. I do have a dedicated video on this one. I think that their shimmers have improved a bit from this palette, but that being said, the shimmers in here are still very nice. They're very like standard but still shiny kind of shimmer formula, and I love this color story. I love the tones in here, especially these two kinds of shades. So interesting to have in this palette and to pair with some of these more cool toned shimmer shadows. And then of course we have a very beautiful green and then also a very beautiful orange. All in all, one of my favorite palettes from Nomad Cosmetics ever, and I'm very excited to get my hands on the newest palette. So let me know in the comments below, what is your go-to fall eyeshadow palette? Which palette do you bring out? And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.